Hello, you are most welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Real Impartation Moment on Tuesday Night Anatomy with Daniel Okwan. Today's section, I take you through Ovarian Folliculogenesis. My friends, already last week we reviewed oogenesis, very important in the production of the functional gametes of the female. So my friends, if you've not watched that previous video already, kindly get a video link, watch it so that at the end of the day, what we'll be doing today will make a lot of sense for you. Now, the point is that we got to that point where we said that for that of the female, the primary gonads, yes, they are, of course, the primary organs by way of the gonads, they are the ovaries. Of course, you have left and right ovaries. Okay, now the point is that oogenesis is going to take place in there. And I told you that whenever we talk about gametes, the important aspect as far as cell division is concerned will be meiosis. We explained that, of course, meiosis will commence in intrauterine life period, around the 5th month of intrauterine life. Of course, it will get arrested. Okay, there will be a long period of dormancy, okay, where there is no meiosis, continue, because it gets arrested at what we call the diplotting stage, okay, of course, prophase 1. And then it will stay there, yes, till, of course, at birth, the, of course, ovaries are inactive, so it doesn't continue. But at puberty, okay, every cycle there's LH, so that, of course, this meiosis will be complete, producing the first polar body, and then, of course, the secondary oocyte. Now we explained that the secondary oocyte, yes, is the one which you have to, undergo meiosis too. But the stimulus, okay, that is needed for completion of meiosis 2, because at the end of the day it will start, but it will get arrested at metaphase of meiosis 2. Okay, the only stimulus is going to be when it is fertilized in, of course, the ampulla of the uterine tube. Okay, we explained these things. Now today we want to look at folliculogenesis. Now, why is this important? Because the point is that these oocytes we are talking about, okay, it's like the egg. The egg will be in a shell, okay? The egg will be in a shell for some kind of support, for some kind of protection, mechanical support. For this reason, this same oocyte we are talking about, which some people may call it egg, will also need to get some kind of external support. And that is why, my friends, that external support, something we call follicular cells. Yes, so you have the oocytes, okay, sitting in that microenvironment, conferring support to it, and that microenvironment, okay, over there are some cells surrounding it, and that is what we call, the follicular cells. Okay, that is very important. I want you to know that follicular cells. For this reason, the oocyte, together with the surrounding sustentacular cells, the surrounding supporting cells, the surrounding follicular cells, everything, we want to call it follicle, yes. Now, these follicles, we are going to differentiate them. They will go through a cohort of them will be selected or will be recruited. Let me use this word, will be recruited. We'll be explaining these words for you. And then they will go through this kind of development process. Yes. And there are some factors which are going to help in this, whole process that we're going to talk about. So that is what I want to, let you know about this one. Now, so take it that we're having a lot of primary oocytes. Now, remember, don't forget that initially the primordial germ cells differentiated, okay, to become, if for the female, to become oogonia. Yes, to become oogonia. Now, for this reason, the oogonia that we have will begin, of course, the mitotic division. We explained that the products of mitotic division of the oogonia, yes, will give us primary oocytes. Now, this primary oocytes, okay, will therefore, yes, the environment is hostile, so they need some kind of support. And that support is going to be coming from, of course, these follicular cells I'm talking about. Yes. Okay, so we are going to get them. And so the first thing I want you to know is what we call follicular formation. So without the follicular cells surrounding these primary oocytes, then we don't form follicles. Yes, we just be forming our primary oocyte, which because of that hostile environment, it may get degenerated. So it needs that microenvironment by way of surrounding, okay, follicular cells. Yes, so that's exactly what I want to take you through today. Okay, explain some concepts, bring some important things, which of course, maybe, a misnomer which we have to, clarify. So in simple terms, I have drawn these things, okay, taking some time to draw some of these things to explain the concept to you. So today we are looking at ovarian folliculogenesis. That is what we are looking at. Now, if you look at it closely, you will see that I'll be having this kind of oocytes over here. This is a primary oocyte. Now, if this is a primary oocyte, then my friends, it suggests to you that this primary oocyte, okay, in intrauterine life period, yes, it began this kind of meiosis 1 and it gets, arrested. Yes, that's important thing that I want you to know. So it is arrested over here in intrauterine life period. But what will happen is that we will have these follicles, okay, these follicles going to be formed from these primary oocytes. Why? Because there will be some cells. Okay, so now if you take a closer look, you will see something that this oocyte over here, which we are calling it primary oocyte, okay, will get surrounded by some cells. My friends, these cells, they are flat cells, flat. Okay, so flat cells will surround these cells, this oocyte. And my friends, these flat cells, okay, in anatomy, yes, the word flat, okay, is the same as squamous. So I'm having squamous follicular cells, single layer of squamous follicular cells. That's what I have over here. Now, these follicular cells, one thing I want you to be aware is that we will call them pregranulosa cells. The reason is that they've not built granules in their cytoplasm yet. For that reason, we are calling them pregranulosa cells. Before granules will invade the cytoplasm, pregranulosa cells, follicular cells. Now, my friends, these follicular cells are epithelial in origin. Follicular cells are epithelial in origin. For this reason, one thing that is very clear for most people, at least those of you who have been watching my channel, I've explained it times without number, that epithelial cells are avascular. For this reason, okay, these follicular cells are also avascular. They do not have blood vessels. Now remember that I told you something, that these follicular cells, they are supposed to give support. Yes, mechanical support, secreting some factors and what we are coming to these things. But then the one important thing that this oocyte needs is that there should be diffusion, okay, of some important nourishment into the oocyte for its metabolic needs, and then the waste product will also have to diffuse out. And these things require vasculature. It needs blood vessels, okay, for that. And that is why, as a necessity, beneath every epithelium, there should be an underlying connective tissue. And in this case, this connective tissue support that we talk about over here is what we call the connective tissue stroma. So surrounding, okay, so we are having the primary oocyte in there. There are some flat cells over there, and even surrounding these flat cells, which are giving support to the oocyte, will be some what we call stroma, connective tissue stroma, supporting the epithelial cells. Yes, that's one important thing that I want you to be aware of. Okay, so we are having the connective tissue stroma all around over there. Now, my friends, another thing, by principle, whenever you have epithelium and then beneath it there's connective tissue, in this case the epithelium is of all the follicular cells, the connective tissue is the stroma. So it means that there will be an intermediate region, okay, of no cell. We don't have any cell over there. Some glycoproteins in there, okay, some collagen types also be in there, okay, mainly collagen type 4 be in there, okay. Then what we see is that there will be something we call basement membrane. So as the junction of what we call the follicular cells, okay, And then of course, the connective tissue stroma, we are going to have this kind of basement membrane and non-cellular region over there. So that is the principles that I want you to be aware. Now, some of these things, we don't cram them. It's just about understanding the concept behind these things. Now, the point is that there's one thing I want you to be aware of. The average diameter of the primary oocyte sitting in, of course, the primordial follicle. Okay, I'll come to these things. Sitting in this follicle that we have over here, okay, is maximum of 15, microns. So that what will happen is that the distance from that, okay, from one end of what we call the granulosa cell of these follicular cells to the other end, okay, by way of the diameter of the follicle itself, will be a maximum of 70 microns. Okay, so that is what we see over here. Now, this follicle that we begin with, okay, is what we call the primordial follicle. Primordial follicle. Now, this is where I want to tell you one concept. That whenever we are talking about these primordial follicles, the point is that a cohort of them, not just one, okay, for simplicity's sake, I'm using one to show you, but a cohort, several number of them will be recruited to go through this follicular development. Yes. And so, apart from, forming the follicles around these primary follicles, a cohort of them, okay, will be recruited. So, recruitment of cohorts of these, follicles. And my friends, these follicles are known as primordial follicles. Now, what will make this primordial follicle is what I've highlighted over here, is the fact that the follicular cells over there, they are squamous, they are flattened. And also sitting in there will be, of course, the primary oocyte, having a complete set of chromosomes. That's why over here I've written 4N DNA, okay, in there. Yes. Now, from there, what happens is that, yes, the growth will continue. Okay. Now, this time I'll explain something to you. Growth will continue. And then we are going to have transformation of these follicular cells, which were squamous, which were flat. Okay. This time around, becoming cuboidal. Now, those of you, something resembles the cube. So, cuboidal. Okay. From squamous to cuboidal, then the name will change. Instead of calling it primordial follicle, it becomes primary follicle. Now remember, yes, primary, not for the reason that sitting in there is primary, oocyte. Why? Because also in the primordial follicle, sitting in there will be primary oocyte. But the only reason that will help you to know, okay, is the presence of cuboidal cells. But my friends, there's a thin line, okay, that I want you to be aware. Now, these kind of, cuboidal cells is a single layer of cuboidal cells. And that's why I've written simple cuboidal follicular cells. Now, at this point in time, granules begin to fill the cytoplasm of these, oocyte. So I've shown some granules in there, in the cytoplasm of these follicular cells. Okay, for that reason, these follicular cells, specifically, we will be calling them granulosa cells. So my friends, whenever you hear granulosa cells, it does not mean that you are looking at different entity. You are still looking at the epithelial cells, which are the follicular cells giving support. Only that we have cytoplasm, okay, filled with, of course, granules. Yes, that's what we see over here. Yes, of course, the oocyte will be maturing again, yes. So, a maximum of 25 microns will be seen at the level of the primary oocyte. But my friends, I told you, I said there's a thin line, the simple cuboidal epithelium. For this reason, we will be calling it primary unilamina. Now, the word lamina has to do with layer. So, uni has to do with one. So, having a single layer, okay, of these follicular cells, in this case, I'm calling them granulosa cells, okay? So, that is what we find over here. Now, the diameter of the follicle itself will go to a maximum of 50 microns. Yes, maximum of 50 microns. My friends, usually I'm not so much comfortable with some of these values because at the end of the day, there are variations, okay? The sizes may not be the same, okay? One person may do an experiment, will find different, find into some of these, average diameters. So, not really to cram distance, but the concept is that as development proceeds, the size of the oocyte, as well as, of course, the follicle itself, the follicular diameter will be increasing as we move on. Yes. So that is, one thing that we see. But there's one more thing that we see, which makes us know that we are not looking at primordial follicle, but we are looking at a primary follicle, and it is unilaminar. Is that the appearance of what we call relatively clear zone of no cell again, and that is the appearance or the development of something we call zona pellucida. Zona pellucida. Yeah, zone and pellucid, it is translucent, so to speak, and so that is why we call it zona pellucida, no cell over there. And please get to know where it is formed. It is formed between, of course, the oocytes, okay, oocyte membrane, and then, of course, the granulosa cells. That is where we find, this kind of zona pellucida. We will see as we move on its relevance, okay, as far as, fertilization is concerned, as far as prevention of ectopic pregnancy in the uterine tube is also, concerned. We will see that. Okay, so that is, one thing that we see. Now, my friends, I told you that there will be some kind of connective tissue too around the connective tissue stroma. Now, with the help of some factors, which I'll be making mention to you in no time, what is going to happen is that these cells of the connective tissue stroma will be transformed to become what we call the real covering, differentiating the remaining stroma, okay, from the one which is immediately covering the follicle. For this reason, because it's covering the follicle, having a coat of covering, we will be calling it theca folliculi. Something we can liken that, yes, it's like something like the capsule of this, follicle. Okay, having that kind of covering, a coat around over there, delineating this follicle from the remaining, what you call it, components of the stroma. Yes, so that is, what we find over here. So theca folliculi. Remember that the word theca has to do with, of course, covering, protective covering over there. Now we'll be seeing it, okay, what it's going to do as we move on. Now, as development continues, what will happen is that there will be rapid mitotic division at the end of the day. Okay, some of these guys, which, of course, we said that they were a single layer of cuboidal cells. As development continues, mitotic division takes place. Then what will happen is that you'll be seeing several layers of cuboidal cells. Now, for simplicity, I have two layers. As it goes on, so there could be early stage, late stage. As development goes on, in this stage only, okay, we'll be seeing that the number of layers of the cuboidal granulosa cells will be increasing. So I have two layers, okay, of cells over here. Now, there hasn't been any change, okay? If you look at it closely, there hasn't really been marked change, okay, between this primary unilaminar follicle over here and then the one I have over here, which is also a primary follicle. Yes, the reason is that there hasn't been marked change. The only change which is very, prominent over here is the presence of several layers of cuboidal cells, granulosa cells. For this reason, we'll be calling this one primary multilaminar, several layers of granulosa cuboidal cells. Yes, that's what we see over here. Now, one thing that we see is that the zona pellucida, okay, will also becoming more and more prominent, okay, with more prominent. Of course, already we've established that between the granulosa cells and then the connective stroma, which in this case we are calling theca folliculi, okay, will be, of course, separated by basement membrane. We've established that one already. Okay, now what do we see? We will see that the maximum diameter of the oocyte will be about 55, microns, with of course the follicle itself going up to about 80, microns. That is what we see. Yes. Now, the other thing is that although it begins, over here, we will see it more in the next picture, which I'll be showing you. Yes, we see that this theca folliculi will begin differentiating into two. Yes. And it will begin differentiating into two so that there will be one of them which is very close, okay, to, of course, the basement membrane. And for that matter, the granulosa cells. For this, we'll be calling it theca interna. Theca interna. Now, we will see the relevance of this theca interna as we move on. Yes, they will be very relevant in steroidogenesis. I'll come to all these things for you. So it means that you see a lot of lipid droplet in there, a lot of smooth endoplasmic reticulum coupled with, of course, mitochondria, very important in making steroid hormones. You see that. Then there will be another one, okay, which is more slender, but for simplicity sake, I'm just using these things to show you. Very slender cells, which do not have endocrine function. They cannot make any hormone. They will not be relevant in steroidogenesis. So they are fibroblast-like cells, okay, which you find them over here, okay, which of course will blend with, of course, the connection around. So for this reason, this one will be called thicker externa, okay. That is what we see over here. It will start forming, but it will be very prominent as you go to the next stage. These two represent the primary follicle. The only thing is that one is primary unilaminar single layer of cuboidal cells, and the other is primary multilaminar several layers of cuboidal cells. And that is why I put over here stratified on top of the other, stratified cuboidal epithelium of granulosa cells. That is what we find over here. Still, don't forget that the oocyte that we still have over here is still the primary oocyte. Nothing has changed. Yes, nothing has changed. So it means that it has not, began meiosis, of course, 2. No, it hasn't begun. It's still arrested. Okay, so it hasn't completed its meiotic, division. That's what we see. Okay, so these are the things that I want you to know. Now remember something. All these changes taking place up to the level of the primary, multilaminar follicle. Okay, the important thing over here that I want you to be aware is that it's not under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Now that's a big statement that I've made. Now the reason is that usually we say folliculogenesis, the hormone, which of course is important, regulating the whole thing, is follicle stimulating hormone, one of the gonadotropin hormones. I'm sure when we talk about gonadotropin hormones, you understand what we are saying. Those hormones secreted, but of course the anterior pituitary gland by way of the luteinizing hormone. In the case of course, the female, in the case of male, we will see that we rather call it ICSH, interstitial cell stimulating hormone, and then also follicle stimulating hormone. But that's where I want you to be aware that this kind of, yes, we talked about follicle formation, so that primary oocyte sitting in, okay, around and surrounded by these follicular cells which are flat, becoming cuboidal by way of the primary unilaminar, becoming stratified cuboidal, having a lot of granules, okay, zona pellucida forming very well, okay. Yes, these things, and then have primary oocyte sitting in there. The point that we see is that the development process is not under the control of FSH. Now, I'm not trying to say that FSH is not there, because the point is that from primary unilaminar follicle coming, what we will see is that these granulosa cells will begin expressing receptors for FSH. And whenever I talk about FSH, I'm talking about follicle stimulating hormone. They begin expressing receptors for it. But my friends, the receptors are not fully developed so that they can, of course, engage the follicle stimulating hormone to cause physiological change in these kind of processes taking place. So what I'm trying to say is that the process of follicular development up to the level of the primary, of course, multilaminar, is not under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Then, my friends, the question is, then it will be under the influence of what? Molecules. And so what I want you to know is that there are some local factors. And these local factors, we call them intra-ovarian regulators. Yes, that is very important that I want you to know. Intra-ovarian regulators. Now, as I told you, these guys, they are not going to be hormone, so to speak, because at the end of the day, they are not going to release the product into the bloodstream. What is going to happen is that these things rather will be, of course, rather be produced by, of course, these granulosa cells, okay, these, paracrine factors, and then, of course, also the thicker cells. So that what is going to happen is that these products will have influence on the follicular growth itself. So some of them will be autocrine or paracrine. So for instance, if it's from theca interna, okay, having influence on the granulosa cells, yes, that will be of course paracrine. And then if there are some products from of course the granulosa cells to the theca, okay, transforming it, okay, which will be of course paracrine. But if the products, let's say granulosa cells affect the granulosa cells itself, it becomes autocrine. Now this is where I want you to be aware. How did this kind of stroma got transformed to become theca? It got transformed because of some products coming from these granulosa cells influencing the stroma. Okay, yes, that's what I want you to be aware of. And so these local factors, okay, over there, I want to mention some of them to you. I've written some of them here just to show you. Even so, the first point over here is even androgens. Androgens. So whenever I talk about androgens, we are talking about hormones for the male. So always I say that females, you don't have only female sex hormones. In other words, you don't have only estrogens and progesterone. Some androgens will also be in there. So there will be local factors regulating some of these things. I want you to know that. Yes, there will also be insulin-like growth factors. Growth factor 1, growth factor 3, they will also be relevant, okay, in controlling these things. Okay, produced by, of course, these granulosa cells and, of course, the theca interna cells. Activin or even inhibin. So activin to activate the whole process to take place very well. Then we also have some oocyte-derived factors. Yes, there are some factors derived from the oocyte itself, may also give off some product, and it will include something like growth differentiating, factor 9 and what have you. But I'm also interested in the bone morphogenetic protein. Now, it's important in bone formation, but it's also relevant over here. Okay, this molecule is also relevant over here. Then, of course, connexin, which everyone knows, that is the gap junction membrane protein channel. Yes, transforming growth factor beta and what have you. It are all important, local factors produced mainly by, of course, the granulosa cells and, of course, the theca interna cells, helping to regulate the whole thing. For this reason, this process, up to this point, we say it is gonadotropin independent. So from the primordial follicle all the way through the primary unilaminar and, of course, the prime multilaminar follicle, before we form another follicle, which we call the antral follicle, these stages, something we call the pre-antral development, is not under the influence of FSH. For that reason, we say it is gonadotropin non-dependent stage. It doesn't depend on it. Okay, that is what I want you to know. Now, my friends, so if we've dealt with the pre-antral development, initially I said there will be follicular formation. Okay, a cohort of these follicles will then be selected, but not all of them. So will be recruited. Not all of them will be selected. Now, we may recruit a lot of people to come and justify themselves, but sometimes not all of them will be selected. Yes. So some of them may die on the way. Some of them may die on the way. Now, those that will die on the way through an unexplained process we call atresia. Now, something that some researchers are saying that if you, do not have a lot of receptors for FSH, yes, you are going to die. So for this reason, studies have shown that in vitro studies, okay, what happens is that when you increase FSH, what happens is that most of them survive. Okay, so that is what I want you to know. But the development will continue until we select one of them. The dominant one will be selected. Okay, so the next thing that I want you to know is to look at these important processes that I want you to know. Now, as we continue, what happens is that not really much change. The only thing is that we form some areas, small areas, filled with some pockets of fluid. So that's what we see. As we've seen already, we'll be having, of course, this kind of stratified cuboidal follicular cells. That's what I'm having. Yes. And for this reason, we are calling it, granulosa cells. Granulosa. granules in the cytoplasm. What else do we see? We will still be seeing, yes, of us, theca interna, theca externa, okay, well differentiated, okay, at the level of the secondary follicle, because this is the secondary follicle. Now, it is not secondary for the reason that it's having secondary oocyte. No, it is still having primary oocytes. So pay attention. So far, whatever I've talked about from primordial follicle through primary lamina, primary multilamina, secondary follicle, we are still having, of course, the primary oocyte. Yes. Of course, our base membrane is intact. Even the zona pellucida has really formed very well. And then there will be some pockets of fluid, some antral areas. For this reason, this follicle can also be referred to as the antral follicle. Now, this is where, there's some kind of a lot of altered concepts around, where people do not really call this one antral follicle. Yes, some people may call it preantral and what have you, but we want you to call it, antral follicle, for the reason that there are some pockets of fluid in there invading, of course, these areas. Now, the question is, where did this pocket of fluids, come from? My friends, what I want you to be aware is that they are produced by the theca interna cells. The theca interna cells will secrete that fluid, and that fluid will, of course, diffuse through the basement membrane, and it will come into the spaces of the granulosa cells. Now, the presence, of these antral areas will make this one a secondary follicle, or the antral follicle. So if you've seen the one I've highlighted in yellow, it means that a striking thing that I want you to be aware of. Yes. So exactly what we have over here. But what we see is that the oocytes will have a maximum diameter of 70 microns. Okay, it was still growing, with a diameter of the follicle being about 100 microns. Yes. Yes, as development continues, what we see is that the fluid, they will coalesce, they will come together, forming a large antral area. And that is why I'm saying that some people may rather call this one antral follicle. No, but I want you to call it, this time around, all the fluids coalescing, the antral areas coalescing, having a large one over here. We want to rather call it, this will make this follicle the tertiary follicle. Tertiary follicle. And this tertiary follicle, something we want you to call it mature follicle, or the pre-ovulatory follicle, because from here ovulation is going to take place. Yes. Or something we want you to call it the mature follicle. Yes. And it's also having an eponym. That eponym is the Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle. Okay, so that is what we have over here. It's an eponym Graafian follicle, with a maximum diameter of the oocyte being 70 microns. It didn't really change so much. It changes a little bit. Okay, so that is what we see, with a maximum follicular diameter of 550 microns. That is what I want you to be aware over here. Now, really, there are some marked changes that I want you to be aware of. The first thing, that of course, we don't have any problem with the theca externa and theca interna. They are intact, no problem. This time around, the first thing I want you to be aware is that the oocyte has finished. There will be that kind of LH stage. It has finished its, of course, first meiotic division is at commenced, the second meiotic division, but it's arrested at metaphyse. Okay, so that is what we see. So for this reason, because of that, you may see this time around it will not be primary oocyte. The only one who is not going to have primary oocyte is the Graafian follicle, the mature follicle, having secondary oocyte. That is why you see half of the DNA over here, half, it's going to be haploid. The oocyte is going to be haploid. And then it will also be having the other product, the first polar body, or the primary polar body also be there. It's also haploid. It may undergo the second meiotic division, and this one will undergo the second meiotic division only and only if fertilization should take place. But one thing that we see, is that the granulosa cells would be differentiated into about 4 components. Yes, the granulosa cells that we find over here invaded by the fluid will be differentiated into 4 areas. And that is something I want you to, pay attention to. The first thing, the oocyte cannot be hanging. Yes, like in the fluid and it is floating in the no. For this reason, there's a stalk-like group of cells, okay, holding the oocyte to one side of the follicle. And that is something we call cumulus euphorus. Okay, cumulus euphorus. Yes, that's what we see. It's also granulosa cells in there at one pole of the follicle, or one pole of the oocyte. Okay, so that's what we see. And then there will be another group of cells, okay, from the cumulus euphorus. Some of the cells will go all around it, okay, finding themselves inside or internal to, of course, the basement membrane. And that is something we call membrana granulosa. Now I've written granulosa cells over here, but precisely the name is membrana granulosa. It's like forming a membrane. You know, usual membrane will be outside. So the granulosa cells which form outside, okay, the oocyte form like a wall covering, is what we call membrana granulosa. Still granulosa cells, just like the cumulus euphorus. Now the other one, okay, will be that some of these, okay, from the cumulus euphorus, some of them, yes, they go all around the oocyte, okay. And my friends, that is what we call corona radiata. Okay, so anything where it's forming a crown-like something becomes corona. So corona radiata. Now, even the corona radiata, I want to differentiate into two. There's that corona radiata, which is just, okay, which is just around the zona pellucida. That's the corona radiata proper. Yes, really surrounding it immediately. Then we have another one. If you can see another layer of corona radiata cells, this time around what we call the large antral region. For this reason, we will call it the periantral, granulosa cells. Yes, so that is one thing I want you to be aware of, that it is at the level of the tertiary follicle that we have all these well-defined, distinctions. Yes, so that is, one thing I want you to do. Now, from this point, the antral development, okay, at this point, what we see is that it is under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Yes, for this reason, we will say that the antral period and then the post-antral period is gonadotropin dependent. Yes, it depends on gonadotropin, hormones, precisely the follicle stimulating hormone. And that is what I want you to know, that the reason is that by this time the receptors for FSH, they are fully developed, and therefore they can interact with, of course, follicle stimulating hormone for that physiological change to take place. Yes, now these processes, they take place in females, yes, during, of course, the menstrual cycle taking place. Now I will tell you later the difference between menstrual cycle and menstrual period. Let me even say it now. Menstrual period is the bleeding phase. Okay, so some of them may bleed for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, maximum 7 days. Okay, that is what we call, the bleeding phase of the menstrual cycle. Okay, now at any time T, right from puberty, once you've had menarche till menopause, at any time T, the female will be in her menstrual cycle. Yes, that's a big statement. Every day. Why? Because the menstrual period is a subset of the menstrual cycle, that unending process. Yes. And as I told you, this, antral development is under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. For this reason, it is gonadotropin, dependent. Now, one more thing I want you to know is that usually we talk about follicular growth, and immediately after your menstrual period, this process is taking place. It's taking place all the time. Well, some of them will be recruited, okay, the dominant one. Now we had a cohort, some were selected, okay, but eventually some of them will grow to become, of course, the mature Graafian follicle, usually one, okay. And since this one, which the oocytes, okay, will have to be ovulated, extruded out for it to be fertilized, okay, by a potential sperm, okay, we will see that. But the point over here I want to show you is that we are saying that the period right after bleeding phase, the menses, is what we call follicular period. And some people think because of the influence of follicle stimulating hormone, but I've explained to you that the preantral period is non-gonadotropin dependent. It is only from the antral stage that it is gonadotropin dependent, which we need, of course, the FSH to do that. Now, as we move on, we will get to know that the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle, okay, of the menstrual cycle, something we also call a pre-ovulatory period, because all these processes I've explained to you, okay, all these processes, they have to take place, okay, before ovulation can take place. Yes. So what we say is that it's also called pre-ovulatory period. Yes. Now, another name that I want to give you, which I'm going to explain to you, is that we can also call it estrogenic period. Why? The reason is that working in synergy, the theca interna, which I told you it to be steroidogenic, okay, together with, of course, the granulosa cells, as development proceeds, they will be making estrogens. So we can also call follicular phase estrogenic phase. We will see that. I'm going to explain to you. And this estrogen is required for something which we see in the womb, in the uterus of the female. It's needed for the initial preparation. Okay, you know, menstruation has taken place. We've taken the functional layer of the endometrium out. So you need to recuperate, regenerate. The initial preparation is done by the influence of these estrogens. Yes. And for this reason, you may also, that process taking place, so the corresponding folliculogenesis, the pre-ovulatory phase, the estrogenic phase, happening inside the female primary organs, the gonads, taking place in the womb, the effect we see in the womb is what we call proliferative phase. Yes, that's what we see. Now, one thing I want you to know is that, let me say that before I go to my last statement, usually we say that the average cycle for the female, average menstrual cycle, we say is 28 days. Now, for the same female, a month can be 28, can be 27, 26, can be 32, what have you, 35. Yes. So it will vary, but you say averagely 28. So that we are told that at the middle of the menstrual cycle, which next week I'm going to explain these things for you. Okay, we are going to learn all these things leading to fertilization and implantation, and then we move on. Usually we are told that the middle of the cycle, there's going to be something called LH surge, luteinizing hormone surge, and it's responsible for the ovulation. We say the ovulation usually takes place at the middle of the menstrual cycle. So if you're having 28 divided by 2, you are getting 14. Now, this is where I want to tell you something. Depending on your menstrual cycle for a particular month, ovulation will not take place on day 14. So someone will argue that if that's the case, then if someone has, for a particular month, 30-day cycle, then what's going to happen is the ovulation will take place on day 15. 32-day cycle, day 16. My friends, that is not exactly the case. It makes sense that we make those kind of projections, but that's not exactly the same. Because the point is that there are two main phases. We will see, this is the follicular phase I'm talking about, and beyond, after ovulation, we have something called luteal phase. I'll come to all these things. That luteal phase that we have will take place is a 2-week period, 2 week, and it's constant, 14 days. So for a particular month, if we are having, let's say, 30 days for that cycle, for that particular month, now you deduct 14 from 30, you are getting about 16. Now what it means is that ovulation will be taking place just close to day 16. Yes. Why? Because the one which will be variable will be the follicular phase and not the luteal phase. The luteal phase will be constant. That's what I want to convey to you. Now, in trying to justify why I'm saying that we can also call the follicular phase estrogenic phase, I have made this, drawing this illustration for us to appreciate what I have over here. And if you take a closer look at what I've written production of estrogens, steroidogenesis. Yes, the first thing. Take it that this cell, there's a cell over here. This cell is one of the cells of theca interna. Yes, take it like that. For this reason, this cell will bear some receptors. Theca interna cells, which I said they have steroid producing properties, which means that within their cytoplasm, including the granulosa cells, they will be filled with lipid droplets. They will be having a lot of long tubular, what we call smooth and plastic reticulum. Okay, together a lot of course, ribosome, because it's energy requiring that we look at these things. What we are going to see is that the cells of theca interna will bear receptors. Yes. Receptors, yes. They will be starting bearing all these things. Will bear receptors for this time around LH. Receptors for LH. The full name meaning of LH is luteinizing hormone. So that's the receptor, LH receptor. It will start producing a lot of them, right? For simplicity, I've just put one over here. So that LH, upon interacting with it, it will make the membrane of the cell of the theca interna more permeable. Permeable to who? To cholesterol. Now, this is where I want to say something. Sometimes we say cholesterol is not good and all that. My friends, if you don't have cholesterol, you cannot be a real female. Neither can you be a real male. Because these hormones, they are steroid hormones. And my friends, steroid hormones, we need these kind of things. We need, of course, cholesterol. Well, not only that, there are several steroid hormones that we have. Okay, talk about these kind of hormones produced by, of course, the adrenal cortex, the adrenal androgens. Okay, talk about the glucocorticoids, the mineralocorticoids. Okay, yes, they are very important, okay, products of cholesterol. Otherwise, functionally, you will not be able to exist as a human being. Yes. So cholesterol is important. It's important in building membranes and all that. Okay, so cholesterol is important over here, and that's what I want you to know, that cholesterol, okay, will become or the cell will be more permeable to cholesterol. So cholesterol will come into the cell. Once cholesterol comes into the cell, now remember, these cells of theca interna, they start manufacturing. So as they grow, they start manufacturing their enzymes. Apart from bearing receptors, they will start manufacturing their enzymes needed for, of course, cholesterol, transformation. So that we produce something we call androstenedione. Now I want you to know this. Okay, so this is the point. So cholesterol in the cell, with the help of the cholesterol, okay, transforming enzymes, changing them to become something called androstenedione. Yes. Now this androstenedione, okay, will be the precursor for what do you call it, for estrogen production. Now you will see something that after you produce this androstenedione in the cell of the theca interna, okay, then what we are going to see is that we'll go to the other cell. So I told you that they will be working in synergy, theca interna and granulosa cells. So sometimes you have to work with people in synergy. You can't do it all. Someone will start, you got to complete it. So who is going to complete it this time around? The granulosa cells. They've built enough granules. And within the granules also, we also have some kind of enzymes in there. And which enzyme are we talking about? Now, before we look at that, what will happen is that these granulosa cells will also bear receptors, produce some kind of receptors. And this time the receptor, okay, will be FSH receptor for interacting with FSH. So that FSH, upon binding to the receptor, will cause a transformational change. So that what will happen is that the cell or the plasma membrane of what we call the granulosa cell will become more permeable. Permeable to who? Androstenedione. Yes, that's what we see. So that this androstenedione will now enter the cell cytoplasm of the whatever of the granulosa cell. It meets some enzymes, okay, to cause aromatization. So an aromatase will be met, so that aromatization will take place, producing estrogens. Now, my friends, that's what I want you to know. Estrogens. It's not just estrogen. Now, once we produce the estrogens, what will happen is that, what I want you to know is that we have 4 kinds of estrogens. Biomolecules, and then they may exert differential effect on the body. Now, one of them is called E1. Now, E1 is estrone. Estrone. Yes, estrone. Now, the other one is E2, the other one is E3. Let me come to E3 first. E3, estradiol. E3 is estriol. Then we go to E4, estetrol. Okay, so that's how we nomenclate these ones. But my friend, the one I've highlighted in yellow is E2, something we call estradiol. Now, if you go to hospital, you are having fertility issues, you are not going to check estrone, estriol, estetrol, you'll be checking estradiol. Now, why? Because estradiol is the one which maximally has important functional implication on the female reproductive system. Yes. Other than that, for instance, you may have something like, we are told that females, for instance, the adult female post-menopause, prosal age, they are more susceptible to something we call osteoporosis, for the reason that their estrogen levels, are very down. Yes, it is mainly the estradiol we are talking about. Why? Because even the adrenal cortex, okay, the zona reticularis, okay, produce some adrenal androgens which can be converted to estrone, okay, it will be produced over there, but it's still not able to solve the case unless we do estrogen therapy, and the estrogen we'll be looking at will be estradiol. Okay, so I want you to understand this whole scenario. As we move on, a lot of revelations will be coming, because this is your anatomy professor. I'll be teaching you all these important things, okay, so that you understand them and understand them very well. Okay, we will end this class here today, and God willing, next week we will continue, okay, revealing all these important things that you need to be aware of. I'm very grateful for your time this evening. Have a good night, all of you, and may the good Lord richly bless you. Amen.